Hello and welcome back to another video, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about the ACRE scheme, because the old man, as I'm recording this video obviously, so yesterday he had a meeting with his Teagasc advisor to talk about the new ACRE scheme that's out. We wanted to get, the plan was that we weren't going to go into it because it was just a lot of stuff in it that we just didn't want to do. It would sort of upset how we run our farm and all that, but we went then as more information started to become more available. The old man went to his Teagasc advisor yesterday, got more information, and obviously I have a lot more information now for this video to talk about the ACRE scheme. And what I want to talk about is explain what our Teagasc advisor told us to do, what would be in it to us, what we have to do, and what the grant is like and all that. So basically I'll be going around to every field and stuff that will be drawn in or dragged into this ACRE scheme if we decide to go into it. And not every field that we own, because we have 100+ acres of land, so not every field will be dragged into the ACRE scheme. There'll be a certain few. The majority of them, in fact all of them, are grazing fields, but not all our grazing fields is going to be dragged into this. But the majority of our grazing fields will be dragged into this ACRE scheme if we do decide to go into it. And if you want more information about the ACRE scheme, I'll put a couple of links down in the description of this video, and you can find out more information about the ACRE scheme for yourself. But I have a little thing here on the phone about what it is. So the ACRE Climate Rural Environment Scheme, ACRES, is Ireland's new ACRE Environment Climate Scheme under Ireland's CAP strategic plan. This new €1.5 billion flagship ACRE Environment Scheme is to address biodiversity decline while delivering an income support. It lasts for 5 years. You get a payment of €5,000 per year, so it'll be ending at around 2027, 2028. That's €5,000 a year, so you get a total of €25,000 from the scheme itself. When we talk to our Teagasc advisor, he says we might and might not get into the scheme, but if we do get into the scheme, it will be March time before we can actually enter the scheme. So it'll be March 2024 for us. From what I picked up from the old man last night when he was talking about it, it's like a lotto system. So us, our farm and our sort of stuff, we might get into it, but there's an opportunity that we might not get into it as well, if you know what I mean. Right, so let's go to our first field, which we'll get. We'll go to our first field now that is going to be dragged into this ACRE scheme, and what we have to do in this specific field if we do get into it. The first field we're starting in is this field here. So this field will be integrated into the ACRE scheme if we get into it. And what we have to do in this field is we cannot graze it. We cannot top the rushes, weed lick the rushes, or spray the rushes during it. We can only do that during a certain period in the year. But for this field in particular, we cannot graze it, we cannot top it, we cannot weed lick, we cannot spray, we cannot do anything in this field. We have to leave it alone to nature, and we have to plant a minimum of 10 trees. There's a maximum of 200 trees you have to plant, but if we get into it, we'll only be planting 10 trees. So in this particular field, we'll have to plant 10 trees, which I don't understand, because we have about 100+ acres of land. A percentage of that is grass fields, a percentage of that is peatland, like bog and stuff, and another percentage of that is woodland, like you see up along there and like you see on this field. So there's a lot of fields that we own that's either right beside a woodland or a forest, or is surrounded by a woodland or a forest, like this field. So I don't know, 10 trees, even though they won't be big after the 5 years, because trees do take a while to grow. I looked it up on the internet there, and the average tree on average grows about 13 to 24 inches a year. So after 5 years, they're not going to be that big. And if we do get into the ACRE scheme, once we plant the trees here, once we get out of the ACRE scheme after the 5 years, the plan is to dig them up and plant them elsewhere, which, you know, after planting them and then having to go back, dig them up and plant them somewhere else, because we're losing a grazing field here. Which is another thing, because we have to plant 10 trees in this field, but we cannot graze it or we cannot do anything to it. We have to let it, nature control it and all that. So we're losing a grazing field. It's not that big of a field. It's only about 3.5, maybe 4 acres. It's not a big field at all. But it does come in handy, this field, if we are running low on grass. Like we have the fields there. That field there is split into 3 paddocks. It's split by drains and stuff. So you have the first paddock, the second paddock, and the third paddock is up there. And we do strip graze the cattle through that. Once they go through all that, we do put them in this field, and then we'll bring them over to another field, or the aftergrass on the silage field. So, you know, we do manage our grass very well. We just strip graze the cattle through it. We don't just let them into the full field all at once, because they do more trampling than they would graze the grass. So we do tend to manage our grazing fields quite well. So in this field, we have to leave it alone to nature, and we have to plant a minimum of 10 trees in it. So we are losing that grazing field if we do get into the new ACRE scheme. Now the next thing is, if we do get into the new ACRE scheme, again, if we get into it, it won't be until March, and again, we mightn't get into it, according to our Teagasc advisor. It's what he said. I don't know the situation, but it's like a lottery. We might and we might not get into it, but that's beyond the point. The next thing is that he said that's on the list, if we do get into it, is that once we're in the ACRE scheme, we cannot clean out any of our drains that's in eligible fields. Now what I mean by eligible fields is that not every field that we own is going to be in the ACRE scheme or incorporated into the ACRE scheme, and not every field we own is going to have the same requirements for the ACRE scheme. But this field in particular, because that field there, the 3 paddock field, will be incorporated into the ACRE scheme, and obviously this one, which I'm after talking about, will be incorporated into the new ACRE scheme. But we're not allowed, if we get into the ACRE scheme, once you're in the ACRE scheme, we're not allowed to clean any of the drains. So before we get into the ACRE scheme, which will be around March time, so sometime before March, if we're able to get down with the digger, because the land is quite soft, so maybe around January, February time, or maybe a week in March before we get into the ACRE scheme, we do want to clean out our drains, because they are getting a bit poorly. You can see that they are getting very poorly. They do need to be cleaned out. And the reason you cannot clean them out is because ACRE is a new environmental and all that sort of scheme. It's for wildlife and stuff. You're not allowed to clean it out for something to do with wildlife anyways. And water, because the drains have a water in it. This has a flow of water in it as well. You can see it's connected to a lot of drains. There's a drain coming down there by the wood. It's going across there along that ditch there, and it sort of continues then this way, if you know what I mean. But we're not allowed to clean out the drains once we're in the ACRE scheme. And before we get into the ACRE scheme, we want to try and get the drains cleaned out, because another 5 years of the drains not being cleaned out, it'll just be a lot of work then after it to clean them out. And as you can see, they haven't been cleaned out in what is it, 10 plus years. They haven't been cleaned out in a while. So yeah, the next thing we have to do is fence off some of our drains in eligible fields. So it's not going to be every field we own. I'll show you further on in the video which fields have to have this fencing off drains and stuff so we have to fence off all our drains in eligible fields to stop cows from crossing or going near drains, and we have to fence 1.5 meters away from the drain, which is also 5 foot. So we have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot away from the drain each side if it's going down the center of the field. So unless there's a natural barrier, unless there's a natural barrier acting as a barrier, you don't need to do the fencing. But in this case we do. So we'd have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot this way from this drain here. I don't think we'll have to fence anything here because it's going to be left to nature, although we might. I'm not 100% sure, but I know for grazing fields we'll have to fence out, and this is a grazing field where cattle will be, so we'll have to fence this drain off to stop cattle from going into the drain. And anyways, cattle are not allowed to go in this field if we get into the ACRE scheme, because it has to be left to nature and wildlife. If you have a natural barrier like this, a ditch or a hedge blocking access to cattle to the drain, as you can see, if we go over this side, you can see that's the drain there. You have a natural barrier there, so you'd only have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot that side of the drain to keep cattle away from the drain as well. Basically to stop them from going into the drain, crossing the drain, because that's then polluting your drain, water systems and all that. And here is a good example. You can see that this drain, you have a field here and you have a field at another side of the drain, which is very easy access for cattle to cross the drain, other than having to go around the long way. So what we'd have to do is try and clean this drain out before, if we get into acres before March. If not, we kind of touch those drains for 5 years, and then we'd have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot this side of the drain, and 1.5 meters or 5 foot that side of the drain. The next requirement that we have to follow if we get into the ACRE scheme is that we can only spread 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure on all our grazing fields. So that's every single grazing field we own. We're only allowed to spread 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure. In total, from fields we actually own, that's surrounded by, that's near our house or farmyard, rented fields, or fields that we own or rent that's sort of a bit of a distance away from our farmyard. We own about 10 to 12 grazing fields in total, but not all of those grazing fields we do spread bag manure on, and we don't tend to spread that much bag manure on the grazing fields that we do spread bag manure on, because we do get an abundance of grass anyways, and most of our grazing fields we might put a bit of slurry on it as well. So if we do the silage field, we'll put slurry on that, and then if there's any slurry left over, we'll just spread it on any grazing field that's sort of convenient to us. And if on a very rare occasion, maybe during a bad winter, and the cattle had to be in for longer than expected, or if we got a load of heavy rain which caused the tanks in the slatted house to fill up more and get quite full, we might have to suck a couple of tanks out of that to drop them below the tanks or below the slats. We'd spread that again on any grazing field that is convenient. So it's a mixture. We spread a small bit of slurry on some of our grazing fields, and on other grazing fields we might spread a small bit of bag manure, but I mean it'll be very, very little. I think we'd only shake bag manure on 4 or 5 of our grazing fields in total out of the 10 or 12, because other ones are just too far away to spread bag manure on it. Well, not too far away, but there wouldn't be as convenient as some of our grazing fields, which is located on or very, very near to the farmyard itself. Also, we'd probably spread 2 to 2.5 bags, maybe possibly even 3 at a stretch, but definitely 2 or 2.5 bags to the acre on our grazing fields. And we would not be spreading 1865. I don't know from the top of my head what type of bag manure we'd spread on our grazing fields, but I know for a fact it's not 1865. And so we're in the ACRE scheme, where we'll be restricted to spreading 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure. So we're restricted to how many bags to the acre we can spread on the grazing field, and we're restricted to what type of bag manure we can spread on our grazing fields. And with the 1865 bag manure, there probably won't be an abundance of grass. So if we get into the ACRE scheme, we are not allowed to clean out our drains, so we'll try and clean them out before March, which is when we'll get word if we get into the scheme or not. We'll also have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot away from the drain, so in this case 1.5 meters or 5 foot this side of the drain, and the same side, the far side of the drain, unless you have a natural barrier like a hedge or a ditch like this one, blocking access to the drain or the waterway from the cattle, so they cannot get into the drain and cross it and pollute waterways and drains. As such, as you can see, you have the drain down there and your natural barrier there blocking access. So then the only thing you'll have to do is fence that side of the drain. And we can only spread 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure on all our grazing fields. Also, I forgot to mention, related to the bag manure situation, the field I was in previous, it's not this field, this is the next field I want to show you for a minute, but the field I was in the last clip, the one that was split into 3 paddocks, that's about 12 to 15 acres, and we're only allowed to spread 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure on that field. So we're restricted to that as well, of that size of a field with that type of bag manure. So we are restricted to that, and there probably won't be an abundance of grass like there would be if we were allowed to spread as many bags to the acre as we want, using the bag manure that we want. Anyways, now moving on, this is the next field. This field is located directly behind our farm. That's our farm there. So this field is about 5-6 acres, which will also be integrated into the new ACRE scheme if we get into it. So we'll only be allowed to spread 1 bag to the acre of 1865 bag manure on this field. And again, this terrain will not be allowed to be cleaned out for 5 years if we do get into the ACRE scheme. So again, we'll have to try and get it cleaned out before March time. And we also have to fence 1.5 meters or 5 foot this side of the drain, and the same the far side of the drain, to stop cattle from going near the drain or crossing the drain. And this field is the what we call the Shroy, is the last field that will be integrated in the ACRE scheme, that has the whole fencing off and drain situation. The bag manure situation is for every single grazing field that we own, but we don't tend to spread that much bag manure on this field, if any at all, but you know yourself. So again, with the ACRE scheme, believe it or not, this is a drain. It has not been cleaned out in decades. If I put my foot in, you can see that I sort of sink down, and there's water in it. It's a drain. It's just not a very deep drain because it hasn't been cleaned out in a very long time. So this drain, if we do get into acres, will definitely need to be cleaned out before we get into acres, because after 5 years I don't think this will be a drain anymore. It'll be filled up and it'll be incorporated into the field as a section of the field itself. But yeah, so this is the last field that will be integrated into the ACRE scheme, where we won't be allowed to clean the drain, and also we'd have to fence 4.5 meters or 5 foot each side of the drain. Now I'm going to go through everything that I explained to you and showed you, and tell you how it affects how we farm and our farm in general. So basically the pros and the cons to the ACRE scheme in relation to our farm. So starting off in the first field that I showed you, the one where we have to leave to nature and not touch and plant a minimum of 10 trees, we're losing that specific field, which we use as a grazing field. So we're losing that grazing field, which in my opinion is sort of, I don't agree with it, we'll put it that way. But does it affect us? Not really, not that much, because we have a load of grazing fields. Some of the fields that we rent, we have about 2 or 3 fields that we rent, that it just isn't, it's not in the perfect state for grazing cattle. We need to go around the whole perimeter of those fields and just like fence it and stuff, because some of those fields don't have any fence in it at all, and others haven't been have old fences in it, and the stakes are just pure rotten and would just not hold any cattle in the field whatsoever. So there is a couple of fields that we are renting that is not capable for putting cattle in, and they're covered in rushes and stuff, so we need to sort that out as well. And when you think of all the cattle we have, well, we don't have much, but when it comes to us in particular, we have to keep a certain number of cattle each year. So we cannot just go around and say, I'm selling you, and you, and I'm keeping the rest of you. We have to have a certain number of cattle each year that we need to maintain. So a couple of these calves, the bullocks, which were 2023 calves, there's 8 of them, 7 of them are bullocks and 1 of them is a heifer. We tend to sell all the bullocks or the bulls. Well, I don't know, I think they're still bulls, they haven't been castrated yet, so yeah, but we would tend to sell all the bullocks and bulls and any cows that have problems with their hooves or only have 2 teats or the likes of that. But we have to be careful, because we have to have a number of cattle each year, so we mightn't be able to sell any of the bullocks or bulls. We might have to keep them, and again they might be put out then for grazing the following year if we don't get them sold. And then when you have cows calving as well, you have those calves to keep, you have weanlings to keep, so it uses up a lot of our grazing fields. 2 or 3 grazing fields that we're renting cannot be grazed because it's not in the right situation for grazing itself. So going back to that field where we have to leave to nature and plant 10 trees in it, we're losing that grazing field, which, it might and might not affect us depending on how much cattle we have to keep and how much cattle are out in grazing, because obviously we do manage our grasslands fairly well. We do a lot of strip grazing in a lot of our grazing fields. We don't do it in every single grazing field. We only do it in the bigger grazing fields. The smaller ones, smaller grazing fields, we do tend to just let the cattle out in the whole lot to roam, even though they'll probably trample a lot of it. But in that case, we'd be putting out the lighter animals like the wainlands and stuff. They'll be put out in the smaller grazing fields and just let loose into the whole lot, while the likes of the cattle, the cows, and then their newborn calves, we tend to leave them in the bigger sort of grazing fields that's nearer the farm, or any place where we can put them into a crush to bull them, AI them. And we tend to then strip graze the bigger grazing fields with the bigger cattle, and then rotate them. Once they have that grass ate, we tend to then rotate them to another field and strip graze them, or let them out into the whole lot. And that small field where we have to leave to nature was a very handy field to have. It was that extra field with that extra bit of grass, and we could keep them there then for, you know, maybe an extra 3, 4, 5, even a week if we had to, if there was enough grass there. But we're now losing that grazing field, so how it will affect us, we won't know until, if we get into acres, we have to sort of sacrifice that grazing field, and then we know, is it affecting us or is it not affecting us? Because at the moment I can't really judge whether or not losing that grazing field is going to affect us. But in the mind of grass and grazing and fields in the summertime, for the majority of farmers, losing a grazing field doesn't sound all that good, and sounds more of a disappointment, or sort of a no-no, a bad side of the scheme. The next thing is obviously the drains and the fencing off of the drains. Now, we have to clean. Hopefully, we can get the drains cleaned before we get into the ACRE scheme. Again, if we get into the ACRE scheme, but hopefully we can get them cleaned, because you won't be allowed to touch them for the duration of the scheme, which is 5 years. Now, we haven't cleaned any of our drains in a very long time, because we've just been busy with other things. We didn't have the right equipment. We didn't have a digger of our own. The land at the time would have been either have cattle in it, and or it'll be too soft during the sort of wet winter months. So, you know, the time of the season and the weather again was against us, so we just weren't able to clean out the drains. But now we have a digger of our own. It's the uncle's. We do borrow it now and then, but now that we have a digger, we can clean out our own drains whenever we like. But again, the ground has to be sort of dry for that sort of stuff, and we don't want to be going in when there's cattle in there, because then you're tearing up their grazing. You're tearing up bits of grass with the tracks of the digger, which the cattle could be grazing, other than us tearing it up with the digger. But yeah, hopefully we can get the drains cleaned out. And the other thing is the fencing off, the 1.5 metres or 5 foot each side of the drain. You're losing in a total of 3 metres or 10 foot in old currency. You're losing, you know, the 5 foot one side and 5 foot the other side. So in total, you're losing 10 foot of grazing up tight to the drain. You're losing that amount of grass and grazing, which in our case, we'd like to utilise our grass and get the most out of it, and keep the cattle in the field grazing the grass for as long as we can, which is why we strip graze a lot of our grazing fields, because the cattle in particular, the cows, if you restrict them to a certain section of the field every time, they tend to eat the grass better. They tend to eat the grass lower down to the ground, and they trample less, which is why we strip graze them. But then we're fencing off drains 5 foot each side of the drain. We're losing that grazing, which, you know, and we're also losing a grazing field as well, which might and might not affect us, We don't know yet. But again, when you're fencing off a drain, we tend to sort of fence off areas, like if we might fence off our field, and if we have our field and a neighbouring field, we'd fence off that, or we'd fence off the outer line of our land, the mirroring fence and all that. But fencing off a drain to us is sort of unnecessary, and we're losing that specific amount of land and grazing and stuff. And you can't really then get into it with a top or any of the likes of that to cut the grass down, because the grass will start to grow because you can't get into it because it's fenced off. So yeah, in my eyes, in my point of view, again, I don't like the idea of that. And last but not least is the bag manure situation. On every single of our grazing fields, we can only spread 1 bag to the acre of 1065 bag manure, which you know, there's not going to be an abundance of grass in it. It's not going to make the grass grow as fast and as much as previous years, when we could spread as much bags to the acre of whatever bag manure we'd like. So we are restricted to that, and we are, again, as I mentioned, we're losing a grazing field, and we're possibly losing a lot of grass in the case of the bag manure situation. So that, in my eyes, again, is another disappointment, or another thing that I dislike about the ACRE scheme. It's, I don't know, you're losing a lot of possibility of grass there, using that specific type of bag manure compared to the bag manure that we would usually use. But after summing up all that, would I join, if I was running the show? It's the old man at the moment yet, but if I was running the show, would I join the ACRE scheme? Again, the €5,000 a year for the 5 years, €25,000 in total, is a lot. That can be put straight back into the farm to improve things in whatever area of the farm we would like. So the money would be a nice thing, but then all the work you have to do, planting trees, the restrictions you have to go through. Me personally, I wouldn't join the ACRE scheme. So it might benefit some farms, but for us, a small farm, small suckler farmer with a small amount of land, well, 100 plus acres isn't that small, but going up the country, we'd be classified as a small farmer. So yeah, I would not join the ACRE scheme if it was up to me. And with that, it is going to be the end of the video, so thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out my merch and the GateMate. The links to them will be down in the description. And I'll see you in my next video very soon. Take care.